Chapter 19. Udo behaves like a gentleman. "And now," said Coronel, "we'd better decide what to do."
"But I don't mind what we do now," said Hyacinth happily. "She may have the throne and father and Udo and anything else she can get, and I shan't mind a bit. You see, I have got you now, Coronel, and I can never be jealous of anybody again."
"That's what makes it so jolly. We can do what we like, and it doesn't matter if it doesn't come off. So, just for fun, let's think of something to pay her out."
"I feel I don't want to hurt anybody today."
"All right, we won't hurt her. We'll humor her. We will be her most humble, obedient servants. She shall have everything she wants."
"Including Prince Udo,"
smiled Hyacinth. "That's a splendid idea. We'll make her have Udo. It will annoy your father, but one can't please everybody. Oh, I can see myself enjoying this." They got up and wandered back along Wiggs's path, hand in hand.
"I'm almost afraid to leave the forest," said Hyacinth, "in case something happens."
"What should happen?"
"I don't know, but all our life together has been in the forest, and I'm just a little afraid of the world."
"I will be very close to you always, Hyacinth."
"Be very close, Coronel,"
she whispered, and then they walked out together. If any of the servants at the palace were surprised to see Coronel, they did not show it. After all, that was their business.
"Prince Coronel will be staying here," said the princess. "Prepare a room for him and some refreshment for us both."
And if they discussed those things in the servants' hall of those days, as why should they not, no doubt they told each other that the Princess Hyacinth, bless her pretty face, had found her man at last. Why, you only had to see her looking at him. But I get no assistance from Roger at this point. He pretends that he has a mind far above the gossip of the lower orders. "I say," said Coronel, as they went up the grand staircase, "I am not a prince, you know. Don't say I have deceived you."
"You are my prince," said Hyacinth proudly.
"My dear, I am a king among men today, and you are my queen. But that's in our own special country of two."
"If you are so particular," said Hyacinth with a smile, "Father will make you a proper prince directly he comes back."
"Will he? That's what I'm wondering. You see, he doesn't know yet about our little present to the Countess." But it is quite time we got back to Belvane. We have left her alone too long. It was more than Udo did. Just now he was with her in her garden, telling her for the 5th time an extraordinarily dull story about an encounter of his with a dragon, apparently in its dotage, to which Belvane was listening with an interest which surprised even the narrator. "And then," said Udo, "I jumped quickly to the right, and whirling my— No, wait a bit, that was later. I jumped quickly to my left. Yes, I remember it now. It was my left. I jumped quickly to my left, and whirling my—" He stopped suddenly at the expression on Belvane's face. She was looking over her shoulder at something behind him. "Why, whoever is this?" she said, getting to her feet. Before Udo had completely cleared his mind of his dragon, the princess and Coronel were upon them.
"Ah, Countess, I thought we should find you together," said Hyacinth archly. "Let me present to you my friend, the Duke Coronel. Coronel, this is Countess Belvane, a very dear and faithful friend of mine. Prince Udo, of course, you know. His Royal Highness and the Countess are— well, it isn't generally known at present, so perhaps I oughtn't to say anything."
Coronel made a deep bow to the astonished Belvane. "Your humble servant," he said. "You will, I am sure, forgive me if I say how glad I am to hear your news. Udo is one of my oldest friends." He turned and clapped that bewildered highness on the back. "Aren't you, Udo? And I can think of no one more suitable in every way." He bowed again and turned back to the prince. "Well, Udo, you're looking splendid. A different thing, Countess, from when I last saw him. Let me see. That must have been just the day before he arrived in Euralia. Ah, what a miracle worker true love is." I think one of the things which made Belvane so remarkable was that she was never afraid of remaining silent when she was not quite sure what to say. She waited, therefore, while she considered what all this meant. Who Coronel was, what he was doing there, even whether a marriage with Udo was not, after all, the best that she could hope for now. Meanwhile, Udo, of course, blundered along gaily. "We aren't exactly, Princess. I mean, what are you doing here, Coronel? I didn't know, Princess, that you... The Countess and I were just having a little... I was just telling her what you said about... How did you get here, Coronel?"
"Shall we tell him?" said Coronel with a smile at Hyacinth. Hyacinth nodded. "I rode," said Coronel. "It's a secret," he added.
"But I didn't know that you..."
"We find that we have really known each other a very long time," explained Hyacinth.
"And hearing that there was to be a wedding," added Coronel. Belvane made up her mind. Coronel was evidently a very different man from Udo. If he stayed in Euralia as advisor, more than advisor, she guessed, to Hyacinth, her own position would not be in much doubt. And as for the king, it might be months before he came back, and when he did come, would he remember her? But to be Queen of Araby was no mean thing.
"We didn't want to be known yet," she said shyly. "But you have guessed our secret, your Royal Highness."
She looked modestly at the ground, and feeling for her reluctant lover's hand, went on.
"Udo and I..."
Here she squeezed the hand, and, finding it was Coronel's, took Udo's boldly without any more maidenly nonsense.
"Udo and I love each other."
"Say something, Udo," prompted Coronel. Yes," said Udo, very unwillingly, and deciding he would explain it all afterwards. Whatever his feelings for the Countess, he was not going to be rushed into a marriage.
"Oh, I'm so glad," said Hyacinth. "I felt somehow that it must be coming, because you've seen so much of each other lately. Wiggs and I have often talked about it together."
"What has happened to the child?" thought Belvane. "She isn't a child at all. She's grown up." "There's no holding Udo once he begins," volunteered Coronel. "He's the most desperate lover in Araby."
"My father will be so excited when he hears," said Hyacinth. "You know, of course, that His Majesty comes back tomorrow with all his army."
She did not swoon or utter a cry. She did not plead the vapors or the megrims. She took unflinching what must have been the biggest shock in her life. "Then perhaps I had better see that everything is ready in the palace," she said, "if your Royal Highness will excuse me." And with a curtsy, she was gone. Coronel exchanged a glance with Hyacinth. "I'm enjoying this," he seemed to say.
"Well," she announced, "I must be going in too. There'll be much to see about."
Coronel was left alone with the most desperate lover in Araby. "And now," said the prince, "tell me what you are doing here." Coronel put his arm in Udo's and walked him up and down the flagged path. "Your approaching marriage," he said, "is the talk of Araby. Naturally, I had to come here to see for myself what she was like. My dear Udo, she's charming. I congratulate you." "Don't be a fool, Coronel. I haven't the slightest intention of marrying her." "Then why have you told everybody that you are going to?" "You know quite well I haven't told anybody. There hasn't been a single word about it mentioned until you pushed your way in just now." "Ah, well, perhaps you hadn't heard about it. But the princess knows, the countess knows, and I know. Yes, I think you may take our word for it that it's true." "I haven't the slightest intention. What do you keep clinging to my arm like this for?" "My dear Udo, I'm so delighted to see you again. Don't turn your back on old friendships just because you have found a nobler and a truer... Oh, very well. If you're going to drop all your former friends, go on then. But when I'm married, there will always be a place for..." "Understand once and for all," said Udo angrily, "that I am not getting married. No, don't take my arm. We can talk quite well like this.
I am sorry, Udo, said Coronel meekly. We seem to have made a mistake. But you must admit we found you in a very compromising position.
It wasn't in the least compromising, protested Udo indignantly. As a matter of fact, I was just telling her about that dragon I killed in Araby last year.
Ah, and who would listen to a hopeless story like that? But the woman one was going to marry.
Once more, I am not going to marry her.
Well, you must please yourself, but you have compromised her severely with that story. Poor innocent girl. Well, let's forget about it. And now tell me, how do you like Euralia?
I am returning to Araby this afternoon, said Udo stiffly.
Well, perhaps you're right. I hope that nothing will happen to you on the way.
Udo, who was about to enter the palace, turned round with a startled look. What do you mean?
Well, something happened on the way here. By the by, how did that happen? You never told me.
Your precious countess, whom you expect me to marry.
How very unkind of her. A nasty person to annoy.
He was silent for a moment, and then added thoughtfully,
I suppose it is rather annoying to think you're going to marry somebody whom you love very much, and then find you're not going to.
Udo evidently hadn't thought of this. He tried to show that he was not in the least frightened. She couldn't do anything. It was only by a lucky chance she did it last time.
Yes, but of course the chance might come again. You'd have the thing hanging over you always. She's clever, you know, and I should never feel quite safe if she were my enemy. Lovely flowers, aren't they? What's the name of this one?
Udo dropped undecidedly into a seat. This wanted thinking out. The Countess. What was wrong with her after all? And she evidently adored him. Of course, that was not surprising. The question was it fair to disappoint one who had perhaps some little grounds for... After all, he had been no more gallant than was customary from a prince and a gentleman to a beautiful woman. It was her own fault if she had mistaken his intentions. Of course, he ought to have left Euralia long ago, but he had stayed on, and, well, decidedly she was beautiful. Perhaps he had paid rather too much attention to that, and he had certainly neglected the princess a little. After all, again, why not marry the Countess? It was absurd to suppose there was anything in Coronel's nonsense. But one never knew. Not that he was marrying her out of fear. No, certainly not. It was simply a chivalrous whim on his part. The poor woman had misunderstood him, and she should not be disappointed.
She seems fond of flowers, said Coronel. You ought to make the palace garden look beautiful between you.
Now understand clearly, Coronel. I'm not in the least frightened by the Countess.
My dear Udo, what a speech for a lover. Of course you're not. After all, what you bore with such patience and dignity once, you can bear again.
That subject is distasteful to me. I must ask you not to refer to it. If I marry the Countess,
you'll be a very lucky man,
put in Coronel.
I happen to know that the king of Euralia... However, she's chosen you, it seems. Personally, I can't make out what she sees in you. What is it?
I should have thought it was quite obvious, said Udo with dignity. Well, Coronel, I think perhaps you are right, and that it's my duty to marry her. Coronel shook him solemnly by the hand.
I congratulate your Royal Highness. I will announce your decision to the princess. She will be much delighted.
And he turned into the palace. Pity him, you lovers. He had not seen Hyacinth for nearly 10 minutes. Chapter 20. Coronel knows a good story when he hears it. I quote, with slight alterations, from an epic by Charlotte Patacake, a contemporary poet of the country. King Merriwig the First rode back from war, as many other kings had done before, 500 men behind him were in sight. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. So far as is known, this was her only work, but she built up some reputation on it, and Belvane, who was a good judge, had a high opinion of her genius. To be exact, there were only 499 men. Henry Smallnose, a bowman of considerable promise, had been left behind in the enemy's country, the one casualty of war. While spying out the land in the early days of the invasion, he had been discovered by the chief armorer of Barodia at full length on the wet grass searching for tracks. The chief armorer, a kindly man, had invited him to his cottage, dried him, and given him a warming drink, and had told him that, if ever his spying took him that way again, he was not to stand on ceremony, but come in and pay him a visit. Henry, having caught a glimpse of the chief armorer's daughter, had accepted without any false pride, and had frequently dropped in to supper thereafter. Now that the war was over, he found that he could not tear himself away. With King Merriwig's permission, he was settling in Barodia, and with the chief armorer's permission, he was starting on his new life as a married man. As the towers of the castle came in sight, Merriwig drew a deep breath of happiness. Home again. The hardships of the war were over. The spoils of victory, wrapped up in tissue paper, were in his pocket. Days of honored leisure were waiting for him. He gazed at each remembered landmark of his own beloved country, his heart overflowing with thankfulness. Never again would he leave Euralia. How good to see Hyacinth again. Poor little Hyacinth, left all alone. But there, she had the Countess Belvane, a woman of great experience, to help her. Belvane. Should he risk it? How much had she thought of him while he was away? Hyacinth would be growing up and getting married soon. Life would be lonely in Euralia then. Unless... Should he risk it? What would Hyacinth say? She was waiting for him at the gates of the castle. She had wanted Coronel to wait with her, but he had refused. "We must offer the good news to him gradually," he said. "When a man has just come back from a successful campaign, he doesn't want to find a surprise like this waiting for him. Just think, we don't even know why the war is over. He must be longing to tell you that. Oh, he'll have 100 things to tell you first. But then, when he says, 'And what's been happening here while I've been away?' Nothing much, I suppose. Then you can say."
"Then I shall say, 'Nothing much, only Coronel, and such a clever—'"
"Oh, I have my ideas," said Coronel. "Well, I'll be out of the way somewhere. I think I'll go for a walk in the forest. Or shall I stay here in the Countess's garden and amuse myself with Udo? Anyhow, I'll give you an hour alone together first." The cavalcade drew up in front of the castle. Handkerchiefs fluttered to them from the walls, trumpets were blown, hounds bayed. Down the steps came Hyacinth, all blue and gold, and flung herself into her father's arms.
"My dear child," said Merriwig as he patted her soothingly. There, it's your old father come back again. There.
He patted her again, as though it were she and not himself who was in danger of breaking down.
"My little Hyacinth, my own little girl."
"Oh, Father, I am glad to have you back."
There, my child. Now I must just say a few words to my men, and then we can tell each other all that has been happening."
He took a step forward and addressed his troops.
"Men of Euralia."
Cheers.
"We have returned from a long and arduous conflict."
Cheers.
"To the embraces," loud cheers, "of our mothers and wives and daughters."
Prolonged cheering.
"As the case may be, hear, hear. In honor of our great victory, I decree that, from now onwards, tomorrow shall be observed as a holiday throughout Euralia."
Terrific cheering.
"I bid you all now return to your homes, and I hope that you will find as warm a welcome there as I have found in mine."
Here he turned and embraced his daughter again, and if his eye travelled over her shoulder in the direction of Belvane's garden, it is a small matter, and one for which the architect of the castle no doubt was principally to blame. There was another storm of cheers. The battle cry of Euralia, "Ho, ho, Merriwig!" was shouted from 500 throats, and the men dispersed happily to their homes. Hyacinth and Merriwig went into the palace.
"Now, Father,"
said Hyacinth later on, when Merriwig had changed his clothes and refreshed himself.
"You've got to tell me all about it. I can hardly believe it's really over."
Yes, it's all over, said Merriwig heartily. We shan't have any trouble in that direction again, I fancy.
"Do tell me, did the King of Barodia apologize?"
"He did better than that. He abdicated."
"Why?"
"Well," said Merriwig, remembering just in time, I killed him."
"Oh, Father, how rough of you!"
"I don't think it hurt him very much, my dear. It was more a shock to his feelings than anything else. See, I have brought these home for you."
He produced from his pocket a small packet in tissue paper.
"Oh, how exciting! Whatever can it be?"
Merriwig unwrapped the paper and disclosed a couple of ginger whiskers, neatly tied up with blue ribbon.
"Father!"
He picked out the left one, Fons et Origo, if he had known any Latin, of the war, and held it up for Hyacinth's inspection.
"There, you can see the place where Henry Smallnose's arrow bent it. By the way," he added, "Henry is marrying and settling down in Barodia. It is curious," he went on, "how after a war one's thoughts turn to matrimony."
He glanced at his daughter to see how she would take this, but she was still engrossed with the whiskers.
"What am I going to do with them, Father? I can't plant them in the garden."
"I thought we might run them up the flagstaff, as we did in Barodia."
"Isn't that a little unkind now that the poor man's dead?"
Merriwig looked round him to see that there were no eavesdroppers.
"Can you keep a secret?"
he asked mysteriously.
"Of course,"
said Hyacinth, deciding at once that it would not matter if she only told Cornell.
"Well then, listen."
He told her of his secret journey to the King of Barodia's tent. He told her of the King of Barodia's letter. He told her more fully of his early duel with the king. He told her everything that he had said and done, and everything that everybody else had said and done to him, and his boyish pleasure in it all was so evident and so innocent that even a stranger would have had nothing more reproachful for him than a smile. To Hyacinth, he seemed the dearest of fathers and the most wonderful of kings. And by the moment came of which Cornell had spoken.
"And now," said Merriwig, "tell me what you have all been doing with yourselves here. Nothing much, I suppose?"
He waited nervously, wondering if Hyacinth would realize that all was meant to include more particularly Belvane. Hyacinth drew a stool up to her father's chair and sat down very close to him.
"Father,"
she said, stroking his hand where it rested on his knee,
"I have got some news for you."
"Nothing about the Count? Nothing serious, I hope," said Merriwig in alarm.
"It's rather serious, but it's rather nice. Father dear, would you mind very much if I got married soon?"
"My dear, you shall get married as soon as you like. Let me see, there were 6 or 7 princes who came about it only the other day. I sent them off on adventures of some kind, but dear me, yes, they ought to have been back by now. I suppose you haven't heard anything of them?"
"No, Father,"
said Hyacinth with a little smile.
"Ah, well, no doubt they were unsuccessful. No matter, dear, we can easily find you plenty more suitors. Indeed, the subject has been very near my thoughts lately. We'll arrange a little competition and let them know in the neighboring countries. There'll be no lack of candidates. Let me see, there's that 7-headed bull. He's getting a little old now, but he was good enough for the last one. We might—"
"I don't want a suitor,"
said Hyacinth softly.
"I have one."
Merriwig leant forward with eagerness.
"My dear, this is indeed news. Tell me all about it. Upon what quest did you send him?"
Hyacinth had felt this coming. Had she lived in modern times, she would have expected the question, "What is his income?" A man must prove his worth in some way.
"I haven't sent him away at all yet," she said. "He's only just come. He's been very kind to me, and I'm sure you'll love him."
Well, we'll arrange something for him. Perhaps that bull I was speaking of. By the way, who is he?"
"He comes from Araby, and his name is—"
"Odo, of course. Why didn't I think of him? An excellent arrangement, my dear."
"It isn't Udo, I'm afraid, Father. It's Cornell.
And who might Cornell be? Said the king rather sternly.
Here he is, Father.
She ran up to him impulsively as he came in at the door.
Oh, Cornell, you're just in time. Do tell Father who you are.
Cornell bowed profoundly to the king. Before I explain myself, Your Majesty, he said, may I congratulate Your Majesty on your wonderful victory over the Barodians. From the little I have gathered outside, it is the most remarkable victory that has ever occurred. But of course I am longing to hear the full story from Your Majesty's own lips. Is it a fact that Your Majesty made his way at dead of night to the King of Barodia's own tent and challenged him to mortal combat, and slew him? There was an eagerness very winning in his eyes as he asked it. He seemed to be envying the king such an adventure after his own heart. Merriwig was in an awkward position. He wondered for a moment whether to order his daughter out of the room.
Leave us, my child, he would say. These are matters for men to discuss.
But Hyacinth would know quite well why she had been sent out, and would certainly tell Cornell the truth of the matter afterwards. It really looked as if Cornell would have to be let into the secret too. He cleared his throat noisily by way of preparation.
There are certain state reasons, he said with dignity, why that story has been allowed to get about.
Pardon, Your Majesty, I have no wish to—
But, as you know so much, you may as well know all. It happened like this.
Once more he told the story of his midnight visit and of the king's letter to him. But, Your Majesty, cried Cornell, it is more wonderful than the other. Never was such genius of invention, such brilliance and daring of execution.
So you like it,
said Merriwig, trying to look modest. I love it.
I knew he'd love it,
put in Hyacinth.
It's just the sort of story that Cornell would love. Tell him how you fought the king at the beginning of the war, and how you pretended to be a swineherd, and how—
Could any father have resisted? In a little while, Hyacinth and Cornell were seated eagerly at his feet, and he was telling once more the great story of his adventures.
Well,
said the king at the end of it, when he had received their tribute of admiration.
Those are just a few of the little adventures that happen in wartime.
He turned to Cornell.
And so you, I understand, wish to marry my daughter.
Does that surprise, Your Majesty?
Well, no, it doesn't. And she, I understand, wishes to marry you.
Yes, please, Father.
That, said Cornell simply, is much more surprising. Merriwig, however, was not so sure of that. He liked the look of Cornell. He liked his manner, and he saw at once that he knew a good story when he heard one.
Of course, he said, you'll have to win her.
Anything Your Majesty sets me to do. It's as well, he added with a disarming smile, that you cannot ask for the whiskers of the King of Barodia. There is only one man who could have got those. Truly an excellent young man.
Well, we'll arrange something, said Merriwig, looking pleased. Perhaps your Prince Udo would care to be a competitor too.
Hyacinth and Cornell interchanged a smile.
Alas, Father, she said, His Royal Highness is not attracted by my poor charms.
Wait till he has seen them, my dear, said Merriwig with a chuckle.
He has seen them, Father.
What? You invited him here? Tell me about this, Hyacinth. He came to stay with you and he never—
His Royal Highness, put in Cornell, has given his affections to another.
Aha! So that's the secret. Now I wonder if I can guess who she is. What do you say to the Princess Elvira of Dragong? I know his father has hopes in that direction.
Hyacinth looked round at Cornell as if appealing for his support. He took a step towards her.
No, it's not the Princess Elvira,
said Hyacinth a little nervously. The king laughed good-humouredly.
Ah, well, you must tell me, he said.
Hyacinth put out her hand, and Cornell pressed it encouragingly.
His Royal Highness Prince Udo,
she said,
is marrying the Countess Belvane.
Chapter 21. A Serpent Coming After Udo. Belvane had now had 24 hours in which to think it over. Whatever her faults, she had a sense of humor. She could not help smiling to herself as she thought of that scene in the garden. However much she regretted her too hasty engagement, she was sure Udo regretted it still more. If she gave him the least opportunity, he would draw back from it. Then why not give him the opportunity? "My dear Prince Udo, I'm afraid I mistook the nature of my feelings," said, of course, with downcast head and a maidenly blush. Exit Udo with haste, enter King Merriwig. It would be so easy. Ah, but then Hyacinth would have won. Hyacinth had forced the engagement upon her. Even if it only lasted for 24 hours, so long as it was a forced engagement, Hyacinth would have had the better of her for that time. But if she welcomed the engagement, if she managed in some way to turn it to account, to make it appear as if she had wanted it all the time, then Hyacinth's victory would be no victory at all, but a defeat. Marry Udo, then, as if willingly? Yes, but that was too high a price to pay. She was by this time thoroughly weary of him, and besides, she had every intention of marrying the King of Euralia. To pretend to marry him until she brought the king in open conflict with him, and then having led the king to her feet to dismiss the rival who had served her turn, that was her only wise course. She did not come to this conclusion without much thought. She composed an ode to despair, an elegy to an unhappy woman, and a triolet to interfering dukes, before her mind was made up. She also considered very seriously what she would look like in a little cottage in the middle of the forest, dressed in a melancholy grey, and holding communion only with the birds and trees, a life of retirement, away from the vain world, a life into which no man came. It had its attractions, but she decided that grey did not suit her. She went down to her garden and sent for Prince Udo. At about the moment when the king was having the terrible news broken to him, Udo was protesting over the sundial that he loved Belvane and Belvane only, and that he was looking forward eagerly to the day when she would make him the happiest of men. So afraid was he of what might happen to him on the way back to Araby.
"The Countess Belvane?" cried Merriwig. "Prince Udo? Marry the Countess Belvane? I never heard such a thing in my life."
He glared at them one after the other as if it were their fault, as indeed it was.
"Why didn't you tell me this before, Hyacinth?"
"It was only just announced, father."
"Who announced it?"
"Well, Udo did," said Coronel.
"I never heard of anything so ridiculous in my life. I won't have it."
"But, father, don't you think she'd make a very good queen?"
"She'd make a wonderful... That has nothing to do with it. What I feel so strongly about is this. For month after month I am fighting in a strange country, after extraordinary scenes of violence and peril. I come back to my own home to enjoy the, fruits of victory. No sooner do I get inside my door than I have all this thrust upon me."
"All what, father?"
said Hyacinth innocently.
"All this,"
said the king with a circular movement of his hand.
"It's too bad. Upon my word it is. I won't have it. Now mind, Hyacinth, I won't have it."
"But, father, how can I help it?"
Merriwig paid no attention to her.
"I come home,"
he went on indignantly,
"fresh from the, spoils of victory to what I thought was my own peaceful, home. And what do I find? Somebody here wants to marry somebody there, and somebody else over there wants to marry somebody else over here. It's impossible to mention any person's name in even the most casual way without being told they are going to get married, or some nonsense of that sort. I'm very much upset about it."
"Oh, father,"
said Hyacinth penitently,
"won't you see the Countess yourself and talk to her?"
To think that for weeks I have been looking forward to my return home, and now I should be met with this! It has quite spoilt my day."
"Father!" cried Hyacinth, coming towards him with outstretched hands. "Let me send for her ladyship," began Cornell. "Perhaps she—"
No, said Merriwig, waving them away. "I am very much displeased with you both. What I have to do, I can do quite well by myself."
He strode out and slammed the door behind him. Hyacinth and Cornell looked at each other blankly. "My dear," said Cornell, "you never told me he was as fond of her as that."
"But I had no idea! Cornell, what can we do now about it? Oh, I want him to marry her now. He's quite right. She'll make a wonderful queen. Oh, my dear, I feel I want everybody to be as happy as we're going to be."
"They can't be that, but we'll do our best for them. I can manage Udo all right. I only have to say rabbits to him, and he'll do anything for me. Hyacinth, I don't believe I've ever kissed you in this room yet, have I? Let's begin now." Merriwig came upon the other pair of lovers in Belvane's garden. They were sharing a seat there, and Udo was assuring the Countess that he was her own little Udo-Wudo, and that they must never be away from each other again. The king put his hand in front of his eyes for a moment, as if he could hardly bear it.
"Why, it's His Majesty," said Belvane, jumping up.
She gave him a deep curtsy and threw in a bewitching smile on the top of it. Formality or friendliness, he could take his choice. "Prince Udo of Araby, your Majesty." She looked shyly at him and added, "Perhaps you have heard."
"I have,"
said the king gloomingly.
"How do you do?"
he added in a melancholy voice. Udo declared that he was in excellent health at present, and would have gone into particulars about it had not the king interrupted.
"Well, Countess," he said, "this is strange news to come back to. Shall I disturb you if I sit down with you for a little?"
"Oh, your Majesty, you would honor us. Udo, dear, have you seen the heronry lately?" "Yes," said Udo. "It looks so sweet just about this time of the afternoon." "It does," said Udo. Belvane gave a little shrug and turned to the king. "I'm so longing to hear all your adventures," she murmured confidingly. "I got all your messages. It was so good of you to remember me."
"Ah," said Merriwig reproachfully. "And what do I find when I come back? I find—"
He broke off and indicated in pantomime with his eyebrows that he could explain better what he had found if Udo were absent. "Udo, dear," said Belvane, turning to him, "have you seen the kennels lately?" "Yes," said Udo.
"They look rather sweet, just about this time," said Merriwig.
"Don't they?" said Udo. "But I am so longing to hear," said Belvane, "how your Majesty defeated the King of Barodia. Was it your Majesty's wonderful spell which overcame the enemy?"
"You remember that?"
"Remember it? Oh, your Majesty. Bowl. Udo, dear, wouldn't you like to see the armory?" "No," said Udo.
"There are a lot of new things in that I brought back from Barodia," said Merriwig hopefully.
"A lot of new things," explained Belvane. "I'll see them later on," said Udo. "I dare say they'd look better in the evening." "Then you shall show me, your Majesty," said Belvane. "Udo, dear, you can wait for me here." The two of them moved off down the path together, Udo taken by surprise, and as soon as they were out of sight, tiptoed across the lawn to another garden seat, Belvane leading the way with her finger to her lips, and Merriwig following with an exaggerated caution which even Henry Smallnose would have thought overdone.
He is a little slow, isn't he, that young man? Said the king as they sat down together. I mean, he didn't seem to understand.
He's such a devoted lover, your majesty. He can't bear to be out of my sight for a moment.
Oh, Belvane, this is a sad homecoming. For month after month I have been fighting and toiling and planning and plotting, and then... Oh, Belvane, we were all so happy together before the war.
Belvane remembered that once she and the princess and Wiggs had been so happy together, and that Udo's arrival had threatened to upset it all. One way and another, Udo had been a disturbing element in Euralia, but it would not do to let him go just yet. Are we still happy together? She asked innocently. There's Her Royal Highness with her young duke, and I have my dear Udo, and your majesty has the Lord Chancellor, and all your majesty's faithful subjects. His majesty gave a deep sigh.
I am a very lonely man, Belvane. When Hyacinth leaves me, I shall have nobody left.
Belvane decided to risk it. Your majesty should marry again, she said gently. He looked unutterable things at her. He opened his mouth with the intention of doing his best to utter some of them, when, not before Udo, said Belvane softly. Merriwig got up indignantly and scowled at the prince, as the latter hurried over the lawn towards them.
Well, really, said Merriwig, I never knew such a place. One simply can't... Ah, your Royal Highness, have you seen our armory? I should say, he corrected himself as he caught Belvane's reproachful look. Have we seen our armory? We have. Her ladyship was much interested.
I have no doubt, your majesty, he turned to Belvane, you will be interested in our armory at home, dear. She gave a quick glance at the king to see that he was looking, and then patted Udo's hand tenderly. Home, she said lovingly. How sweet it sounds. The king shivered as if in pain, and strode quickly from them. Your majesty sent for me, said Coronel. The king stopped his pacings and looked round as Coronel came into the library.
Ah, yes, he said quickly. Now sit down there and make yourself comfortable. I want to talk to you about this marriage.
Which one, your majesty?
Which one? Why, of course yours. That is to say, Belvane's. Or, rather...
He came to a stop in front of Coronel and looked at him earnestly.
Well, in a way, both.
Coronel nodded.
You want to marry my daughter, Merriwig went on. Now it is customary, as you know, that to the person to whom I give my daughter, I give also half my kingdom. Naturally, before I make this sacrifice, I wish to be sure that the man to whom... Well, of course, you understand.
That he is worthy of the Princess Hyacinth, said Coronel. Of course, he couldn't be, he added with a smile.
And worthy of half the kingdom,
amended Merriwig.
That he should prove himself, this is also, I think, customary.
Anything that your majesty suggests,
I am sure of it.
He drew up a chair next to Coronel's, and sitting down in it, placed his hand upon his knees and explained the nature of the trial which was awaiting the successful suitor.
In the ordinary way, he began, I should arrange something for you with a dragon or whatnot in it. The knowledge that some such ordeal lies before him often enables a suitor to discover, before it is too late, that what he thought was true love is not really the genuine emotion. In your case, I feel that an ordeal of this sort is not necessary.
Coronel inclined his head gracefully.
I do not doubt your valor, and from you, therefore, I ask a proof of your cunning. In these days, cunning is perhaps the quality of all others demanded of a ruler. We had an excellent example of that, he went on carelessly, in the war with Barodia that is just over, where the whole conflict was settled by a little idea which...
A very wonderful idea, your majesty.
Well,
said Merriwig, looking very pleased.
It just happened to come off, that's all. But this is what I mean when I say that cunning may be of even more importance than valor. In order to win the hand of my daughter and half my kingdom, it will be necessary for you to show a cunning almost more than human."
He paused, and Cornell did his best in the interval to summon up a look of superhuman guile into his very frank and pleasant countenance.
"You will prove yourself worthy of what you ask me for," said Merriwig solemnly, "by persuading Prince Udo to return to Araby. Alone."
Cornell gasped. The thing was so easy that it seemed almost a shame to accept it as the condition of his marriage. To persuade Udo to do what he was only longing to do did not call for any superhuman qualities of any kind. For a moment he had an impulse to tell the king so, but he suppressed it. After all, he thought, if the king wants cunning, and if I make a great business of doing something absurdly easy, then he is getting it. Merriwig, simple man, mistook his emotions.
"I see," he said, "that you are appalled by the difficulty of the ordeal in front of you. You may well be so. You have known His Royal Highness longer than I have, but even in our short acquaintance I have discovered that he takes a hint with extraordinary slowness. To bring it home to him with the right mixture of tact and insistence that Araby needs his immediate presence alone may well tax the most serpentine of minds."
"I can but try it," said the serpentine one simply. The king jumped up and shook him warmly by the hand.
"You think you can do it?"
he said excitedly. "If Prince Udo does not start back to Araby tomorrow."
"Alone,"
said Merriwig. "Alone. Then I shall have failed in my task."
"My dear,"
said the king to his daughter as she kissed him good night that evening,
"I believe you are going to marry a very wise young man."
"Of course I am, father."
"I only hope you'll be as happy with him as I was with your mother. Though how he's going to bring it off," he added to himself, "is more than I can think."
Chapter 22. The 17 volumes go back again. King Merriwig of Eastern Euralia sat at breakfast on his castle walls. He lifted the gold cover from the gold dish in front of him, selected a trout, and conveyed it carefully to his gold plate. When you have an aunt... But I need not say that again. King Coronel of Western Euralia sat at breakfast on his castle walls. He lifted the gold cover from the gold dish in front of him, selected a trout, and conveyed it carefully to his gold plate. When your wife's father has an aunt... Prince Udo of Araby sat at breakfast, but one must draw the line somewhere. I refuse to follow Udo through any more meals. Indeed, I think there has been quite enough eating and drinking in this book already. Quite enough of everything, in fact. But the time has nearly come to say goodbye. Let us speed the Prince of Araby first. His departure from Euralia was sudden. 5 minutes' conversation with Coronel convinced him that there had been a mistake about Belvane's feelings for him, and that he could leave for Araby in perfect safety.
"You must come and see us again,"
said Merriwig heartily as he shook him by the hand.
"Yes, do,"
said Hyacinth. There are 2 ways of saying this sort of thing, and theirs was the second way. So was Udo's when he answered that he would be delighted. It was just a week later that the famous double wedding was celebrated in Euralia. As an occasion for speech-making by King Merriwig and largesse-throwing by Queen Belvane, it demanded and got a whole chapter to itself in Roger's history. I have Roger on my side at last. The virtues he denied to the Countess, he cannot but allow to the Queen. Nor could Hyacinth resist her any longer. Belvane upon her palfrey, laughter in her eyes and roses in her cheeks, her lips slightly parted with eagerness as she flings her silver to the crowd, adorably conscious of her childishness and yet glorying in it, could have no enemies that day.
"She is a dear," said Hyacinth to Cornell. "She will make a wonderful queen."
"I know a queen worth 2 of her," said Cornell.
"But you do admire her, don't you?"
"Not particularly."
"Oh, Cornell, you must," said Hyacinth, but she felt very happy all the same. They rode off the next day to their kingdom. The Chancellor had had an exciting week. For 7 successive evenings he had been extremely mysterious and reserved to his wife, but now his business was finished and King Merriwig reigned over eastern Euralia and King Cornell over the west. Let us take a look at Belvane's diary before we move on to the last scene. Thursday, September 15th. It says, "Became good." Now for the last scene. King Merriwig sat in Belvane's garden. They had spent the morning revising their joint book of poetry for publication. The first set of verses were entirely Merriwig's own. It went like this.
Bol bol, bill bol, wo wol, will wol.
A note by the authors called attention to the fact that it could be begun from either end. The rest of the poems were mainly by Belvane, Merriwig's share in them consisting of a
capital
or an "I like that" when they were read out to him. But an epic commonly attributed to Charlotte Patacake had crept in somehow.
"A person to see your majesty,"
said a flunky appearing suddenly.
"What sort of person?"
asked Merriwig.
"A sort of person, your majesty."
"See him here, dear," said Belvane as she got up. "I have things to do in the palace." She left him, and by the flunky returned with the stranger. He was a pleasant-looking person with a round, clean-shaven face, something in the agricultural way, to judge from his clothes.
"Well," said
Merriwig.
"I desire to be your majesty's swineherd,"
said the other.
"What do you know of swineherding?"
"I have a sort of natural aptitude for it, your majesty, although I have never actually been one."
"My own case, exactly. Now then, let me see. How would you—"
The stranger took out a large red handkerchief and wiped his forehead.
"You propose to ask me a few questions, your majesty?"
"Well, naturally,
Let me beg of you not to. By all you hold sacred, let me implore you not to confuse me with questions."
He drew himself up and thumped his chest with his fist.
"I have a feeling for swineherding. It is enough."
Merriwig began to like the man. It was just how he felt about the thing himself.
"I once carried on a long technical conversation with a swineherd," he said reminiscently, "and we found we had much in common. It is an inspiring life."
"It was in just that way," said the stranger, "that I discovered my own natural bent towards it."
"How very odd. Do you know, there's something about your face that I seem to recognize."
The stranger decided to be frank.
"I owe this face to you,"
he said simply. Merriwig looked startled.
"In short,"
said the other,
"I am the late King of Barodia."
Merriwig gripped his hand.
"My dear fellow," he said, "my very dear fellow, of course you are. Dear me, how it brings it all back. And, may I say, what an improvement. Really, I'm delighted to see you. You must tell me all about it. But first, some refreshment."
At the word refreshment, the late King of Barodia broke down altogether, and it was only Merriwig's hummings and hawings and thumpings on the back and later on the refreshment itself which kept him from bursting into tears.
"My dear friend,"
he said as he wiped his mouth for the last time,
"you have saved me."
"But what does it all mean?"
asked Merriwig in bewilderment.
"Listen, and I will tell you."
He told himself of the great resolution to which he had come on that famous morning when he awoke to find himself whiskerless. Barodia had no more use for him now as a king, and he on his side was eager to carve out for himself a new life as a swineherd.
"I had a natural gift," he said plaintively, "an instinctive feeling for it. I know I had. Whatever they said about it afterwards, and they said many hard things, I was certain that I had that feeling. I had proved it, you know. There couldn't be any mistake."
"Well?"
But they laughed at me. They asked me confusing questions, niggling little questions about the things swine ate and things like that. the great principles of swineherding, what I may call the art of herding swine, the whole theory of shepherding pigs in a broad-minded way, all this they ignored. They laughed at me and turned me out with jeers and blows to starve.
Merriwig patted him sympathetically and pressed some more food on him.
I ranged over the whole of Barodia. Nobody would take me in. It is a terrible thing, my dear Merriwig, to begin to lose faith in yourself. I had to tell myself at last that perhaps there was something about Barodian swine which made them different from those of any other country. As a last hope, I came to Euralia. If here too I was spurned, then I should know that—
Just a moment,
said Merriwig, breaking in eagerly.
Who was this swineherd that you talked to?
I talked to so many,
said the other sadly.
They all scoffed at me.
No, but the first one, the one that showed you that you had a bent towards it. Didn't you say that?
Oh, that one. That was at the beginning of our war. Do you remember telling me that your swineherd had an invisible cloak? It was he that—
Merriwig looked at him sadly and shook his head.
My poor friend, he said. It was me.
They gazed at each other earnestly. Each of them was going over in his mind the exact details of that famous meeting.
Yes,
they murmured together.
It was us.
The King of Barodia's mind raced on through all the bitter months that had followed. He shivered as he thought of the things he had said. The things that had been said to him seemed of small account now.
Not even a swineherd, he remarked.
Come, said Merriwig. Look on the bright side. You can always be a king again.
The late King of Barodia shook his head.
It's a come down to a man with any pride, he said. No, I'll stick to my own job. After all, I've been learning these last weeks. At any rate, I know that what I do know isn't worth knowing, and that's something.
Then stay with me, said Merriwig heartily. My swineherd will teach you your work, and when he retires, you can take it on.
Do you mean it?
Of course I do. I shall be glad to have you about the place. In the evening, when the pigs are asleep, you can come in and have a chat with us.
Bless you, said the new apprentice. Bless you, your majesty.
They shook hands on it.
My dear, said Merriwig to Belvane that evening, you haven't married a very clever fellow. I discovered this afternoon that I'm not even as clever as I thought I was.
You don't want cleverness in a king, said Belvane, smiling lovingly at him, or in a husband.
What do you want, then?
Just dearness, said Belvane. And now my story is done. With a sigh, I unload the 17 volumes of Euralian history from my desk, carrying them one by one across the library and placing them carefully in the shelf which has been built for them. For some months they have stood a rampart between me and the world, behind which I have lived in far-off days with Merriwig and Hyacinth and my Lady Belvane. The rampart is gone, and in the bright light of today which streams onto my desk, the vision slowly fades. Once on a time. Yet I see one figure clearly still. He is tall and thin, with a white peaked face of which the long inquisitive nose is the outstanding feature. His hair is lank and uncared for, his russet smock, tied in at the waist, wants brushing. His untidy cross-gartered hose shows up the meagreness of his legs. No knightly figure this, yet I look upon him very tenderly, for it is Roger Scurvylegs, on his way to the palace for news. To Roger, too, I must say good-bye. I say it not without remorse, for I feel that I have been hard upon the man to whom I owe so much. Perhaps it will not be altogether goodbye. In his 17 volumes there are many other tales to be told. Next time, if there be a next time, I owe it to Roger to stand aside and let him tell the story more in his own way. I think he would like that.
But it shall not be a story about Belvane. I saw Belvane, or someone like her, at a country house in Shropshire last summer, and I know that Roger can never do her justice. The end.